My name is Evelyn Carter, and if you had asked me just a few months ago where I saw myself in the future, I would have told you with absolute certainty, right here, at the helm of my family's company, surrounded by people who shared not only my blood, but also decades of hard work, loyalty, and trust. But life has this cruel way of pulling the rug out from under your feet when you least expect it. What happened to me wasn't just betrayal. It was devastation on a scale so personal that even now, as I sit here trying to piece together how everything fell apart, I can barely believe it's real. Let me start at the beginning, because maybe then you'll understand why this feels like more than just losing a business. It's losing an identity, a legacy, and, most painfully, a family. My grandfather founded Carter and Company over 40 years ago. He started small, selling industrial equipment out of his garage after coming home from the war. Back then, he didn't have much except grit, determination, and a dream. Over time, that dream grew into something remarkable. By the time I came along, we were one of the leading distributors in the region, known for quality products and unmatched customer service. And yes, while family business might sound quaint or old-fashioned these days, for us it meant everything. Growing up, I never doubted where I belonged. From the moment I could walk, I was tagging along with my dad to the warehouse, watching him negotiate deals, shake hands, and solve problems. By the time I graduated college, I knew exactly what I wanted: to carry on the tradition, to honor what my grandfather built, and to make sure our name stayed synonymous with integrity and excellence. For 35 years, that's exactly what I did. But let me back up a little, because there's someone else you need to meet before I get too far ahead of myself. His name is Julian, my younger brother. If I'm being honest, Julian always had a different kind of ambition. Where I saw stability and pride in keeping things steady, Julian saw opportunity and sometimes shortcuts. We clashed often over the years, especially once he joined the company full-time. He'd come up with bold ideas, risky ventures, and flashy marketing campaigns that made our parents nervous. But Dad always gave him a chance, saying, "Every family needs a dreamer." So despite our differences, we worked side by side, for better or worse. The rest of the family? Well, there's Aunt Margaret, who handles HR and has been part of the company since its early days. She's sharp, no-nonsense, and fiercely loyal, or so I thought. Then there's Uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother, who oversees finances. He's quiet, methodical, and doesn't say much unless it's about numbers. Together, they formed the backbone of Carter and Company, each playing their role in maintaining the balance that kept us thriving. For years, it felt like nothing could break us. Sure, there were disagreements, heated arguments during board meetings, moments when tensions ran high. But at the end of the day, we were family, or so I believed. Things began to shift subtly about 2 years ago. That's when Julian started talking about expansion. Big moves into international markets, mergers with tech startups, partnerships with investors whose names I didn't recognize. At first, I dismissed it as typical Julian enthusiasm, but soon his pitches became relentless. He brought guest speakers to meetings, showed projections that seemed almost too good to be true, and talked endlessly about scaling faster than ever before. The rest of the family listened politely, nodding along, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to voice my concerns privately to Dad, reminding him of the risks involved in moving too quickly. "We've built this company on trust," I said one evening after a particularly intense meeting. "Do we really want to gamble everything on untested strategies?" Dad sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Evelyn," he said gently, "you're cautious because you care. But sometimes growth requires taking leaps of faith." It wasn't until later that I realized Julian hadn't been acting alone. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, alliances within the family began to shift. Aunt Margaret, usually so steadfast, started questioning my leadership during strategy sessions. "Maybe Evelyn's approach is holding us back," she suggested once, her tone casual but her words cutting deep. Uncle Robert, who rarely spoke unless prompted, suddenly chimed in with financial analyses supporting Julian's plans. Even Mom, who had always stood firmly by my side, began hinting that perhaps it was time for fresh perspectives. At first, I chalked it up to stress or miscommunication. After all, running a business isn't easy, and tensions naturally arise. But the cracks widened further when Julian introduced someone new to the table, a consultant named Marcus Kane. Tall, polished, and armed with charts and graphs that dazzled everyone except me, Marcus quickly became Julian's right-hand man. They presented joint proposals outlining radical changes, restructuring departments, cutting long-standing client relationships, and redirecting funds toward experimental projects. Each presentation felt like another brick being pulled from the foundation we'd worked so hard to build. And then came the day I'll never forget, the day everything unraveled overnight. It started innocently enough with a routine board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. I arrived early, coffee in hand, ready to tackle the agenda. As usual, Julian was already there, pacing near the window with Marcus beside him. Their hushed conversation stopped abruptly when I entered, and Julian flashed me a tight smile before turning away. Something about his demeanor set off alarm bells, but I pushed the thought aside, assuming it was just pre-meeting nerves. When everyone gathered around the conference table, the atmosphere felt unusually tense. Aunt Margaret avoided eye contact, fiddling with papers in front of her. Uncle Robert stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Even Mom seemed distracted, twisting her wedding ring absent-mindedly. Only Julian appeared calm, leaning back in his chair with an air of confidence that bordered on smugness. Dad called the meeting to order, his voice steady as he reviewed the previous quarter's performance. Just as he transitioned to discussing upcoming initiatives, Julian cleared his throat loudly, interrupting him mid-sentence. "Actually, Dad," he said, standing up, "there's something important we need to address first." Everyone turned to look at him, including me, though my stomach churned with unease. Julian gestured for Marcus to distribute folders to each of us. Inside mine was a document titled Proposal for Strategic Acquisition. My heart sank as I skimmed through the pages, realizing what it entailed: a buyout offer from an outside corporation, spearheaded by none other than Marcus himself. The terms were staggering, not just financially, but emotionally devastating. Under this deal, Carter and Company would cease to exist as we knew it, absorbed entirely into Marcus's parent company. Worse still, the agreement included clauses stripping me of any decision-making power moving forward. What is this?" I stammered, looking around the room for support. No one met my gaze. Instead, Julian launched into a rehearsed speech about how this acquisition represented the next chapter for our company, promising unprecedented growth and innovation. His words blurred together as panic surged through me. This wasn't just a business proposal, it was a coup orchestrated behind my back. When Julian finished speaking, silence hung heavy in the air. Finally, I found my voice. "Did anyone think to discuss this with me beforehand?" I demanded, glaring at each of them in turn. "This is insane. You're throwing away decades of hard work, our reputation, our values, all for some shiny promise of quick profits." Aunt Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "Evelyn, sweetheart, it's not that simple. Times are changing, and we have to adapt if we want to survive." "Survive?" I echoed incredulously. "We're thriving. Our customers love us. Our employees respect us. Why would we throw all that away?" Uncle Robert interjected, his tone clipped. "Because the market is evolving and clinging to outdated methods will leave us behind. Marcus's team has done extensive research. This is the smart move." Smart move. The phrase hit me like a slap. How could they dismiss everything we stood for so easily? How could they betray me like this? Mom finally spoke up, her voice trembling. "Evelyn, please try to see it from our perspective. We're doing this for the future, for all of us." "For all of us?" I repeated bitterly. "Or just for Julian?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Julian stiffened, his jaw tightening. "Don't make this personal," he snapped. "This isn't about you, Evelyn. It's about ensuring the company's success." "No," I shot back, rising to my feet. "This is about greed, recklessness, and blind ambition. And worst of all, it's about betrayal from every single one of you." With that, I stormed out of the room, tears streaming down my face. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Betrayed, humiliated, alone. Those three words echoed in my mind as I drove aimlessly through the city streets, unable to process what had just happened. Hours later, I returned home to find an email waiting for me, an official notification that the board had voted unanimously to accept the buyout offer, effective immediately. 35 years of dedication, reduced to a footnote in someone else's corporate empire. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the walls lined with photos of happier times. Family gatherings, milestone celebrations, proud moments at the company. All those memories now felt tainted, overshadowed by the bitter truth. My own flesh and blood had turned against me, choosing profit over principle, strangers over family. And as much as I wanted to scream, cry, or lash out, I knew none of that would change anything. Instead, I vowed to fight not just for myself, but for the legacy my grandfather built. Because if there's one thing I've learned from this ordeal, it's that revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about reclaiming what's rightfully yours. The days that followed were a blur of anger, disbelief, and sleepless nights. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus, couldn't even look at the stack of congratulatory emails flooding my inbox from colleagues who didn't know the truth. Or worse, those who did and thought I deserved it. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about what had happened. Evelyn's too old school, some whispered. Others said she was holding them back. The audacity of their words stung. But what hurt more was knowing they came from people I had trusted for years. I tried reaching out to Dad first, hoping he might understand how betrayed I felt. But when I called him, his voice was distant, almost robotic. "Evelyn," he sighed, "this isn't easy for any of us. But sometimes sacrifices are necessary for progress." Progress. I shot back, my voice trembling. "Dad, do you even hear yourself? This isn't progress, it's destruction." There was a long pause before he replied, softer this time. "It's done now, sweetheart. All we can do is move forward." Move forward. That phrase haunted me. How could I possibly move forward when everything I'd worked for was being dismantled piece by piece? When every decision I'd made in good faith was being undone by Julian and Marcus? And yet, despite the rage boiling inside me, I knew Dad wasn't entirely wrong. There was no going back, not unless I wanted to fight fire with fire. That realization hit me one morning as I sat staring at my laptop screen, scrolling through news articles about the acquisition. The headlines gleefully proclaimed Carter and Company-S sale as a game-changing merger, praising Marcus Kane as a visionary leader while barely mentioning our family name. It was as if we'd been erased overnight, replaced by someone else's narrative. For the first time since the betrayal, clarity washed over me. If Julian and Marcus thought they could rewrite history, they were sorely mistaken. I would make sure of it. But revenge isn't something you plan lightly. To take them down, I needed allies, people who still believed in what Carter and Company stood for, people willing to stand with me against the tide. My first call was to Lisa Chin, our longtime head of operations. Lisa had been with the company for nearly 20 years, loyal to a fault, and I hoped she hadn't fallen victim to Julian's charm offensive. When she answered, her tone was cautious. "Evelyn, is everything okay?" "No," I admitted bluntly. "Everything's falling apart, Lisa, but I need your help to fix it." She hesitated. "You know I value loyalty above all else, Evelyn. But this situation is complicated." "It's not complicated," I countered sharply. "Julian sold us out to strangers without consulting anyone outside his little circle. Does that sound like loyalty to you?" Silence stretched between us for a moment before Lisa exhaled heavily. "What do you need from me?" Relief surged through me, but I kept my voice steady. "For now, just listen. And keep your eyes open. If there's anyone else on the team who feels the same way, let me know. We're not alone in this." Lisa agreed, though reluctantly, and promised to reach out discreetly to others. After hanging up, I spent hours mapping out potential strategies. First, I needed proof, not just of Julian's betrayal, but of Marcus's true intentions. Something told me their shiny promises weren't as altruistic as they appeared. Digging into financial records and confidential documents would be risky, but it was a risk I had to take. My next step was reconnecting with clients. Over the years, I'd built strong relationships with many of them, earning their trust through transparency and reliability. If anyone understood why Carter and Company mattered, it was them. So I started making calls, explaining the situation carefully without sounding bitter or desperate. Some listened politely but declined to comment. Others expressed sympathy but said they couldn't afford to jeopardize their contracts with the new owners. But a handful, just enough to give me hope, agreed to stay quiet for now and wait to see how things unfolded. As the weeks passed, I began piecing together fragments of information that painted a troubling picture. Through Lisa, I learned that several key employees had already resigned, citing pressure from Marcus to adopt practices that went against our core values. One former manager confided that Marcus had quietly terminated long-term supplier agreements, replacing them with cheaper alternatives linked to his parent company. Another source revealed that Julian had secretly negotiated bonuses for himself and Aunt Margaret tied directly to the success of the acquisition, a revelation that left me seething. Armed with this evidence, I started drafting a counterproposal designed to expose the flaws in Marcus's plan. It wouldn't be easy convincing shareholders to reconsider, especially after they had already signed off on the deal. But if I framed it right, if I highlighted the risks to our reputation, customer base, and bottom line, I might have a chance. More importantly, I needed to remind everyone why Carter and company had succeeded in the first place. Because we cared about quality, integrity, and community. Still, I knew I couldn't do this alone. As much as I hated admitting it, I needed reinforcements, someone with influence, resources, and a grudge against Marcus Kane. Enter Daniel Reyes, a former rival turned reluctant ally. Daniel ran a competing distributorship in another state, and while we'd clashed professionally in the past, he'd always respected my commitment to ethical business practices. When I reached out, he sounded skeptical at first. "Why should I help you, Evelyn?" he asked bluntly. "Last time we crossed paths, you accused me of poaching your clients." "That was business," I replied evenly. "This is personal, and if Marcus succeeds, he'll come after you next." Daniel laughed dryly. "Fair point. What's your plan?" I laid it out for him. Expose Marcus's hidden agenda, rally disgruntled employees and clients, and force the board to reconsider the acquisition. In return, I promised him exclusive partnerships once we regained control. He mulled it over for a moment before agreeing, though not without a warning. "If this blows up in your face, don't expect me to bail you out," he said. "But if it works, well, let's just say I've got a vested interest in seeing Marcus fail." With Daniel on board, momentum began to build. Together, we gathered testimonies from former employees detailing toxic working conditions under Marcus's leadership. We compiled data showing projected losses due to severed supplier relationships and declining customer satisfaction rates. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in Marcus's carefully constructed facade. Meanwhile, tensions within the family reached a breaking point. Aunt Margaret, racked with guilt over her role in the betrayal, approached me one evening, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for it to go this far," she sobbed. "Julian convinced me it was the only way to secure our future. And look where that got us," I snapped, though my anger softened slightly at the sight of her distress. "Do you realize what you've done, Margaret? You've destroyed everything Grandpa worked for." She nodded miserably. "I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Just tell me what you need." Her apology wasn't enough to forgive her, not yet, but it gave me leverage. With her cooperation, I gained access to critical internal communications revealing Marcus's ulterior motives. Among them was a damning email chain outlining plans to phase out the Carter and Company brand entirely within 6 months, replacing it with Marcus's corporate logo. Armed with this bombshell, I called an emergency meeting with the board, leveraging every ounce of authority I had left. "You may think selling the company was a smart move," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "But what happens when customers stop recognizing our name? When suppliers refuse to work with us because of broken promises? When employees walk away en masse because they no longer believe in what we stand for?" One by one, I presented my findings, watching as shock and shame spread across their faces. Even Julian looked uneasy, shifting uncomfortably in his seat as I unveiled each layer of deception. By the end of the presentation, the room was silent until Uncle Robert finally spoke up. "We made a mistake," he admitted quietly. "A grave one. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a start." For the first time since the betrayal, I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Rebuilding Carter and Company wouldn't be easy, but with determination and grit, I knew we could rise from the ashes stronger than ever. Yet, as I walked out of that meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus wasn't finished with us. Not by a long shot. The weeks following the emergency board meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Armed with undeniable evidence of Marcus's deceit and the board's growing unease, I worked tirelessly to dismantle the acquisition deal piece by piece. It wasn't easy. Marcus fought back with every tool at his disposal, issuing legal threats, spreading misinformation, and even attempting to sway key shareholders with promises of inflated returns. But this time I wasn't alone. With Lisa leading internal efforts to rally employees, Daniel leveraging his industry connections to pressure suppliers, and Aunt Margaret providing crucial insider information, we formed an unstoppable coalition. Together, we chipped away at Marcus's empire, exposing cracks in his polished veneer that he couldn't hide. Former clients came forward, sharing stories of broken contracts and subpar service under Marcus's leadership. Industry watchdogs began investigating irregularities in his parent company's financial dealings. And slowly but surely, public opinion shifted in our favor. Julian, however, remained a wild card. While the rest of the family had started to see the error of their ways, Julian clung stubbornly to his vision of grandeur, refusing to admit defeat. "You're ruining everything," he shouted during one particularly heated argument. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me? What I've cost you?" I shot back, incredulous. "Julian, this isn't about money. It's about integrity. Something you clearly don't understand." For all his ambition, Julian was unprepared for the fallout. As the truth came to light, his carefully constructed alliances crumbled. Even Marcus distanced himself, eager to save face amidst mounting scandals. By the time the dust settled, Julian found himself isolated, not just professionally, but personally. The brother I once knew seemed lost, swallowed whole by his own greed and hubris. Finally, after months of relentless effort, the day arrived when the board officially reversed its decision. In a unanimous vote, they terminated the acquisition agreement, citing irreconcilable differences and breaches of trust on Marcus's part. Carter and company was ours again, battered and bruised but still standing. The news spread quickly, sparking celebrations among employees, clients, and loyal supporters who had stood by us through the darkest days. That evening, I gathered everyone at the old warehouse where Grandpa had first started the business decades ago. It felt fitting to mark the occasion here, surrounded by memories of where it all began. As I looked out at the sea of familiar faces, some tearful, others jubilant, I realized how far we'd come. This victory wasn't mine alone. It belonged to everyone who had refused to let Carter and company fade into obscurity. "Tonight," I said, raising a glass, "we celebrate resilience. We celebrate loyalty. And most importantly, we celebrate the power of remembering who we are and what we stand for. My grandfather built this company on principles of honesty, hard work, and community, and together, we've proven those values are worth fighting for." Cheers erupted around me, echoing off the walls like a symphony of redemption. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to feel truly at peace. The road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but I knew we could face them as long as we stayed united. Afterward, as the party wound down, Dad approached me, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I'm so sorry for everything. You were right all along." I nodded, wrapping him in a tight hug. "It's okay, Dad. What matters is that we're here now, together." As the night drew to a close, I stepped outside, breathing in the cool air under a sky filled with stars. Somewhere deep inside, I felt Grandpa's presence, his quiet pride warming my heart. He'd always taught me that setbacks were temporary, but legacies were eternal, as long as you had the courage to fight for them. And fight we did. Carter and company thrived in the years that followed, stronger than ever thanks to the lessons we learned. We rebuilt not just the business, but also the bonds within our family. Julian eventually returned, humbled and ready to make amends. Though forgiveness didn't come easily, we welcomed him back, knowing that healing was part of moving forward. In the end, the betrayal hadn't destroyed us. It had forged us into something greater, something unbreakable. Because while revenge may have been the spark that ignited the fire, it was love, loyalty, and determination that carried us home.